Well, thank you, Emily, and thank you, jurors, for being part of this process. Can I acknowledge Mickey for that welcome to country? There are also some members here of the Consultation and Response Agency Advisory Board. It's a group of people that are supervising this whole process to make sure it all works properly. There are a group of people around here who are observers who are here to help you. There are also people that are joining us on live streaming, so welcome to you. We can't see you, but we know you're out there. And ladies and gentlemen, well, this is an incredibly important milestone in our community engagement process on the nuclear fuel cycle. But it's actually a pretty important milestone for South Australian democracy. And I know that many of you, when you got that letter in the mail, would have made a decision about wanting to be part of this for a whole range of reasons. But I can remember the first conversation I had when we had the first citizens jury, when I went up to a fellow and I asked him why he wanted to be part of the citizens jury. And he told me he had a young son, and he, like most people, thought the politics didn't work very well. And the reason he wanted to get involved is to show his young son that politics can work. And I suppose in a very real sense, some of you may have been motivated by a similar thought, that politics, as usual, doesn't work that well. I think we've seen just yesterday in Britain a pretty spectacular example about division and disunity over complex questions. And so in a way, what we're asking you to do is to make a contribution to democracy, actually a better way of citizens coming together and answering complicated issues. And your role in that is going to be absolutely crucial. You're generously giving your time, your energy, and importantly your brain power, so thank you for that. Some of you have actually given up your traditional morning coffee at Lucia's, I know, so for that massive sacrifice, I want to thank you, because I've made the same sacrifice and it's driving me crazy. But really, the fact that you've come here open-minded with a spirit of goodwill, I think is a massive contribution to your fellow South Australians. As evidenced by the gathering outside today, there are strong feelings in relation to this matter. Some people will have made their mind up without even reading the report and not needing to know anything else. And that's fair enough. People are entitled to just act on the basis of sentiment, and we've got to respect that. I think what we want to do, though, is to encourage as many South Australians as possible, including the people outside, to keep an open mind for as long as possible about these questions so that we can come up with some wise judgments. What you're essentially doing is engaging in a process of engaged citizenship. Not just the idea of what's good for me and perhaps the people around me, but actually stepping outside of yourself and saying what's good for my community. And more profoundly with a question like this, not what's good for my community, not just now, but for hundreds, maybe thousands of years into the future. And that is a very, very big set of decisions. So in a sense, while this is an obligation that you've freely entered into, it's a massive privilege on behalf of the broader community to actually be part of that process. And in a real sense, you're the stewards of this process, because this group of citizens, if you choose to, can go all the way to the end of the process for the final citizens jury, which we comprise of 350 people at the end of the process. So the question that we're really asking you to consider is what role South Australia should play in the nuclear fuel cycle. We know it's a complex question with enduring implications, so it's for this reason that we've decided to go down what is a very extensive process. And this, of course, is, in a sense, the second part of it. The first part was the Royal Commission. We asked Kevin Scarce to look at all of the issues and come up with a report which expresses a whole bunch of factual findings. But this next phase is about how we take that report and give it the broadest possible exposure so people can actually use it, put it to some use to inform their decision-making process. The reason we chose a Royal Commission, most Royal Commissions happen after something's gone wrong and tell us how to clean up the mess. This is a Royal Commission which is quite different. We've done it at the beginning of the process to help us guide our decision making. So it's quite a rare approach, and it's the highest form of fact finding that we have, and the community and the citizens have confidence in Royal Commissions, and we chose somebody of impeccable integrity, Kevin Scarce, to run it. As you know, he's produced a 320-page final report which was handed down last month. It contains 12 recommendations and 145 findings. And the next step is to sort through the wealth of that material contained in the report and decide which elements of it South Australians want to discuss further. Now, we could have done that as the government, but we believe that it was appropriate that ordinary everyday citizens do that, because we would have been accused of setting the agenda. So what we want you to do is look at that report and see things from your perspective. One thing we do know about complex issues, the quickest way to kill them and to get a very cynical response from the broader community is to get a bunch of experts telling ordinary people what they should think. And so we're determined to make sure that expertise is put in the service of citizens, not telling citizens how things should be. Because the greatest resource we have in our community is the common sense judgment of ordinary everyday citizens. Listening to experts, but not being dictated to by experts. Experts in the service of citizens, not experts telling citizens what to think. That's why you're here, to guide that process. And this is the role of the First Citizens jury, to actually make sense of this report so that when we put it out to the broader community, they can actually make use of it. It'll help us take the conversation to as many people as possible. We want to make this report as accessible as it is. It's pretty well written, but nevertheless, it's still pretty dense at the moment. And we know most South Australians won't read it. So and we also know that there's probably only 2 or 3 things that people will be able to keep in their mind in any one point in time to actually grapple with. So we're going to have to, brutal simplicity without losing any of the essential complexities is the ultimate guide here. You will help independently frame what we should be paying attention to. I urge you to bring clarity and precision to this process so that the statewide consultation phase can be carried out with an enormous sense of confidence, integrity and effectiveness. And it's a big ask, taking such a big report and crunching it down into something, its essence. We're looking for you to devise the key topics for people in South Australia to consider. We'd like it obviously expressed in a straightforward, neutral and non-prejudicial language. And despite what some people have been saying, there is no aspect of the Royal Commission which is a done deal. And in a sense it can't be, because there has to be a broad community consensus about the government taking the next step before we can sensibly go forward. Otherwise we'll be leading to the divisions and disunity we've seen in other divisive debates around the world. While the government doesn't have a predetermined result in mind, I must tell you that I wouldn't have commenced this process if I wasn't open to the notion of expanding further our involvement in the nuclear fuel cycle. So of course we're open to it, but whether we take that next step has not yet been determined. What we want to do is carry out a process that allows people to be confident of the facts, to engage in a mature discussion, and to ultimately arrive at a mature and wise judgment. So everybody starts on every topic with a series of opinions and views, people's first thoughts. But at the end of the process, what we want to do is to have their judgment based on choices and to give you some idea about this notion of choice, I just want to dwell on this for a moment. We're really looking for you to work through the key issues in a way that recognises the complexity of the topic and the need for us to make choices. a simple yes/no questions without any context doesn't assist governments to make a decision. For example, I'll give you an example from the health sector, which assists to really understand things. If you ask people if they wanted more and better healthcare, the answer would be yes. If you took a poll on that, everyone would tick that box. If you ask people if they wanted to pay more to do this, the answer would be no. People would tick every box. So those are predictable answers, but they're isolated from each other and they're irreconcilable. Those two things just don't work. So you can get that type of deliberative process and you just tally up all the numbers and then, but where does it take you? Where does it assist policymakers and decision makers about what they should do next? So that's one approach. It's not the approach we're asking you to help us with. It doesn't take account of the fact that some issues are just not capable of an easy yes/no answer. And if there's an Exhibit A on the table, it's what happened yesterday in Britain. The Brexit vote was a yes/no answer. Should we stay in Europe? Should we leave Europe? Now the country is split almost right down the centre, 52-48. And in some cases, Scotland and Ireland strongly wanting to go out. And what you've got is this no capacity to actually reconcile all the different perspectives, just a simple yes/no. There's just no capacity to have worked through the things that are worrying people about being in Europe, the things that, the advantages of being separate, the disadvantages of being separate. All of those things couldn't be debated because you only had this yes/no. And this process stands in stark contrast to that, to help people work through those questions. So, against this backdrop, we're hoping that the topics that the jury will identify will assist decision makers to arrive at a decision. It won't be valuable for us to learn, for example, that some people are opposed to establishing a nuclear waste facility and some are in favour. We know that. Instead, what we need to consider is our role in the nuclear fuel cycle in the wider context. What are the choices that are available? While I've said that government won't prejudge these issues, I think there is a role for political leaders, not just politicians, but including politicians, to engage in this debate over these coming months as we start to go out to the public consultation phase. It is appropriate for politicians to lay down their values about these matters. In my case, one of my personal values is that I wouldn't contemplate any deeper involvement in the nuclear fuel cycle if it compromised South Australian safety. That would be, from my perspective, a no-go zone. Secondly, I wouldn't contemplate expanding our role and generating any economic benefits that may exist unless those benefits were shared more broadly. Now, they're my personal values, and I'll express them as the debate goes on. And we'll invite other people to express their values. So we shouldn't be afraid of people expressing their values. They will ultimately have to be played into the decision-making process at the end of the day. The government's role, from my perspective, is to elicit the broadest possible range of perspectives in this process, so that our responsibility is to give weight to those views in the community and ultimately to act in the best interests of South Australians. What the entire citizens' jury and consultation process does is not to arrive at a decision, but to actually arrive at a decision about whether the government can make a decision. So what we're really wanting to know is essentially, have you satisfied yourself that you've got every possible perspective out there and told us about those perspectives, including the strength and the size, perhaps even of how they're held? And is it now over to us? That's basically what we're asking. We're not abdicating our responsibility to make a decision to you. What we want, though, is to know whether the debate has got to a sufficient level of maturity that we could safely say it is now over to you guys to make the decision. And that's an important distinction. There's been a lot of people running around saying, how can we give 50 people the chance to make a decision about future generations of South Australia? Well, we're not asking you to do that. What we're asking you to do is to help us make a wise decision. And the way we'll make a wise decision is to make sure that enough people in South Australia feel as though they've been involved and have had their say, and that you've been able to accurately describe all of the different perspectives and all the different elements, so that when we do make a call, it's based on the best available evidence. That's ultimately where this process needs to wind up. So, ladies and gentlemen, I know that you're going to give the best, all your best for the next 2 weekends that you'll be sitting for this citizens' jury. There'll also be a further citizens' jury. I have absolutely every confidence that you'll make a massive contribution to assisting this issue being understood in the broader community. So thank you for coming together, and thank you very much for devoting your time and effort into this, probably this most important issue facing South Australia. Thank you.
Okay, Premier, I'm going to put you on the spot. Are you happy to take some questions?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Is anything? Now's your chance. I don't know if that's on. Yeah. I can't get that on.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that second jury, we know those dates. I think we're talking about through October. So what we've got this for the next couple of weekends, a big process of going out to the broader community, and which is in a sense the biggest part of the exercise, the length and breadth of the state, on the basis of what you produce to try and guide that process. Then coming back together, you as part of 350 others. The reason 350 is chosen is that statistically that gives you out of 1.6 or 7 million people, that gives you a statistically relevant sample. So it should have most of the perspectives.
Why are we doing it? Are we doing it just for money? Is that the reason why we're doing it?
Well, you tell me why you're doing it. You're the one that I just invited you to do it.
No. I mean,
why
we're
mean
digging a hole.
Oh, I see. Sorry, misunderstood you. Well, we're asking the question about whether we should do it. If it's just for money, well, that's the question. It's a good question. If it is that good enough? Jobs, prosperity, you'd have to weigh that up against essentially risk and safety. They're some of the big questions you're going to have to ask yourself. And I think that's really what this is all about. If it is for money, is that enough? And can you satisfy yourself that it's safe enough to... how big's the money? How real is the money? How real are the risks? Can they be managed? I suspect there's some of the questions you'll ask yourself.
Hi, Premier. This is Sudhir. Here. I had just one question, because whichever way we choose to go, there will be a huge upfront cost attached to it before we start realizing the benefits. And how exactly are we planning to fund that huge amount of infrastructure build that would be required, along with a big maintenance and disaster recovery budget? I mean, considering that we are already struggling as an economy, and not everything is going in the favor at the moment.
Yeah. Well, I think in the Royal Commission report, the Commissioner says you wouldn't spend any money until you had the country that was sending the material pay for it. Essentially, you'd have locked-in contracts and they would pay for it. So I don't think we're going to be building anything on spec. So that's what the report talks about, and you'd have to analyse whether that's realistic. He seems to think it is, but that's the process. There wouldn't be any upfront money being put in without locked-in commitments from donor countries. That's certainly what's contained in the report.
As a result of our deliberations, how is that going to be distributed to the general public?
I think that's really a question for you. That's part of what you'll decide. In a way, what you're doing here with this first jury is you're almost producing a guide to the 320-page report. What should you look at? If you don't want to read the whole 320 pages, what should you look at? How should we frame up the choices? Then there'll be a bunch of things come back through that process over these months when we're going out to the South Australian community. How you summarise that and then send that back to government, and then how you publish that and send that to the broader community so that everybody knows what you've told us will once again be a matter for you. So I would presume that anything you want to tell government, you'll want to publish and tell the broader community about what you've found, so that there can be no doubt about what we've heard.
Okay. Any more questions?
Yeah, there's a couple
Now's your
of them.
opportunity. Go.
You mentioned Brexit as an excellent example of a yes-no decision. Would you agree that the reaction of many people in the UK was opposition to being dictated to by the experts?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It is a rolled gold example of the elites, all the movie stars and the politicians telling ordinary everyday people of Britain what they should think. And I think as much as anything else, people rebelled against that. And what I'm trying to do with this is to the complete opposite. That's why, if I was running this, it was with all the best will in the world, I don't think it would have as much credibility as essentially a group of citizens like you running it. And in a sense, it's one of those questions where we just can't. This won't happen unless this community consents to it, in a broad sense. And I don't mean, I don't think that's. I think consent in this sense isn't a vote; it's an acceptance. Sometimes it may not. It's just an acceptance that this is an appropriate decision for the government, or one of the range of decisions that the government could take. And maybe it even be a decision you agree with, but within the acceptable range of responses for a government to take. Now, if there isn't that, it won't happen. It can't happen because we're talking about decisions here that span decades, even hundreds of years. So it's not one of these decisions you can take one year and say, oh, we've changed our mind. We're actually again going to. Having said that, though, there may well be gateways where, and that's one of the things what might emerge out of this, is it may be that there are steps where we say, well, we are prepared to explore it to this point, but then if there's an irrecoverable decision to be taken, then we'll reconsider our position. So it may be that there are gates. And that's something you might want to think about. Sorry, there was a...
Yeah. Just a question on, the report lets us be clear on the facts of nuclear, and that was the terms of reference for the Royal Commission. But I just find it lacking in the alternatives to nuclear. And, I know there's a curse regard to renewables, I'd say, in here. And, just reduction in consumption, better housing design. There's lots of other policy options before we head down a nuclear energy path. And I just found that hasn't been explored enough for me.
Yeah, what the report really says about energy is that really between now and 2030, there's no viable nuclear energy option for Australia. So in a sense, it sort of defers that. And although it does say you should prepare yourself, because it anticipates that by 2030 we will need another form of energy which is not carbon producing, and the assessment in the report is that that may have to be nuclear. Or it doesn't say that it should, it says that it might be one of the things that you have to consider. So you should take steps now to clear the way to make sure that you've got that option in 2030. Now, so it's, in a sense, if the report dealt with three things, or four things: mining, and it says tick, you should do more mining if you can. Enrichment, it says there doesn't seem to be any short-term or medium-term opportunity there because the world has got enough enriched uranium resources, so cross. Nuclear energy, there doesn't seem to be any near-term or medium-term proposition there, cross. Waste storage, tick. That's in very broad terms, that's what it's saying.
Premier?
So quite a lot of the report talks about the economics of the various activities. That involves quite a lot of crystal ball gazing, I guess you could call it. How can we be confident in estimates?
Yeah.
Because I guess it's fair to say the general public would see things like maybe the hospital or other big endeavours that tend to run over time, over budget. So if we're being asked to judge the merits of this, how can we say that these numbers make sense?
Good question. I mean, in fact, both of those things are a point there about renewable energy. If you think that it may be that the perspective you bring to it is that renewable energy isn't being given sufficient weight or balance here and it needs to be considered in this context, that's an important observation so that people understand the whole picture. In relation to the finances about whether these things, in terms of the nuclear waste storage and its potential economic benefits, what the Royal Commissioner would say is that he's given a conservative estimate. But I think that anxiety, that natural anxiety that people have because they see government projects overrunning and in terms of cost, etc., I think it may well be that what you bring to this is that that's one of the most significant issues the community needs to be satisfied about, and so there needs to be a greater exploration of that. That might be one contribution that the citizen jury has made. We're looking at all these things now. You might say, look, we're satisfied storage, that safety for storage is ticked off. We get that. We're satisfied that we're worried about transport to the storage site. Question mark about that. We're actually quite worried about the economics. Are the benefits that are claimed actually there? And we think that's going to resonate in the minds of people. We need to spend more of our time on that, slightly less of our time on the technology about storage, a little bit of extra time on... See, they're the sort of things that's exactly the sort of feedback that we're hoping will emerge.
How many of the 350-person jury will be general public? 100%?
Yeah,
Yep.
Same process. So we'll send up another 25,000 letters? Or was it? Oh,
And
this
is
man
that
knows how-
also, is that also 100% of the answer, what that jury decides?
No, the way it will work is this. Is it the same 25,000? I'll give you the technical answer first and I'll answer the second part second.
Okay, so we'll do a little bit on selection later. The core of this is random drawing. So the same way we randomly drew Australia post addresses, there's other random draws we can do. Things like based on lottery numbers, here is your mobile phone number. We need to pick something which people say isn't fair. So there is postal options, but we're also aware of other options we use, like those watch the Monday Lotto or watch number 29 come up first. If you've got that in your phone number, you'll pick, which are really efficient way for us to reach large numbers of people. Equally, because we had such a high response to the first round that you all got selected for, we'll also be using that tool as well to give them that chance to participate.
Okay, so we sent out 25,000 letters, 1,000 came back, obviously only 50 got chosen, so we've still got theoretically 950, assuming they're still interested. So somehow we'll get another 300, is it? 50 plus 300, is that how it works?
50 plus 300.
Yeah, so another 300 plus you guys. Assuming nobody drops out, because that may happen, it may not be convenient for you to participate in October. But your second question is, what does the second jury really do? The second jury is about, so first jury, guide to the report. Which bits of this should people focus on? Second second process, going out to the broader community and asking all the perspectives. Third jury, summarising those perspectives and giving a report to government, which will be presumably publicly published. And then fourth process, in a sense, is us making a decision, assuming the 350-person jury has said actually it's now well enough developed for the government to make a decision, or at least a preliminary decision to, one decision could be proceed to the next step, but stop there and wait for the next tick. that could be one potential outcome.
I suppose one of the queries is that long term, if we agree as a state and as a government, that we should need to go forward and we believe that storage is an opportunity for us, there's still legislative issues nationally that need to be addressed. So regardless of what 350 is a contribution of the percentage of our state, it's not a large enough percentage of a national level to make the government of the day nationally change those legislative barriers that exist today to allow us to go to that state.
Yeah, that's exactly right. In fact, it's even broader than that. It's you'd need state government. There's state government legislation and policy. There's federal government legislation and policy, and there's international treaties and agreements you'd need cooperation for. So, you know, the truth is, this would be, even if you said yes tomorrow as a state, it would then be a long process for the Commonwealth to say yes, and then a long process for the international community to say yes. So you wouldn't get any change out of this anytime soon. The other thing to remember is that there are political parties come into play here. So federal Labor Party policy, federal Liberal Party policy, state Labor Party policy, state Liberal Party policy, and not all of those things are yet lined up. But the truth is that those political parties are looking carefully at this process. You know, so this process is not unrelated to how political parties will respond ultimately to this question. But there's no doubt it would need to be bipartisan for this to ever happen.
If as a state tomorrow we said no, where do we go from there?
Well, I think that becomes an important part of the decision. There are choices here. That would mean closing off an opportunity, and that's fine. That's a legitimate choice. But as long as people knew that that's the decision that was being taken, and fully aware of the consequences of that, and it's a perfectly reasonable decision to take.
So is there a plan in place to then look at further renewable options, money allocated to further investigations and so forth?
Well, I don't think the two things are mutually exclusive. I mean, there is one view that Australia or South Australia would never need to have nuclear energy, that it could use renewable energy. We already have one of the highest levels of renewable energy anywhere in the world. We're at 42% going up to 50% at the moment, which is very high. I think outside of Denmark, we've got more wind power than anywhere in the world. So we're already on an international scale quite strong on renewables, and there's no reason why that couldn't continue. It's just that some countries in the world won't necessarily have the capacity to have renewable energy, and they may still have nuclear industries. And because we have 25% of the world's uranium deposits, we'll probably still be mining and selling uranium. And the question arises, should we store the waste of that? I mean, that arises, I think, independently of how we run our energy system. So the two things could stand together. We could have essentially our power needs dealt with through renewable energy, but we're still in the nuclear fuel cycle through mining or some other element of the process.
Okay, I'm terrified of these guys, Premier.
Yeah, good question.
I'm thinking they might be calling you back as a witness. So thanks, Premier, for your time and answering those questions.
Thank you.
Thanks.